Good morning, everybody. We're still waiting for a few more people to log on. We've got quite a bit of audience for this one. If someone could send me on to the questions tab, let me know that you can hear me. The call-in number for the webinar. All right. Someone asked me for the call-in number to the webinar, and I'm going to. Christina, can you mute your phone?
I did mute my phone. I was on mute. I'm gonna go back on mute.
Okay. I'm getting a little bit of background, but the call-in number is 213-929-4212. And the access code is 373-357-333#. Thanks, Stan. I may be emitting a little background noise here, and I'm going to go on mute once I turn this over to David. But we're going to give this about a couple more minutes to let a few more people jump online. David, we'll get started in like 2 minutes.
Okay,
I just
no
want to
problem.
make sure we get everybody in. I will remind everybody that everybody is on mute because we've got such a large group. It's often easier to do it that way rather than catch everyone's background noise. I'm not seeing anyone new. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started while I do some introductions. Hopefully, anyone else who's waiting to get in will get in. I apologize if you're getting any background noise from my end. I seem to be hearing it in my ear. But I want to welcome everybody to our February 20th webinar, Start Webinar. We are excited to have you all with us. We have on the line with us David Leng, who's going to present to us on workers' compensation issues. So let me give you a little bit about David. David is the Executive Vice President and Managing Partner of Duncan Insurance Group, a division of Duncan Financial, both of which are a part of our friends at Keystone. And we thank our partners at Keystone for introducing us to David a few years back. David is an author of international bestsellers, The Law of Insurance Attraction, Turning Premiums into Profits, as well as one of the top-selling books on workers' compensation for employers, Stopping Frustrated and Overcharged. David is a faculty member of the Institute of Work Comp Professionals and a contributing fellow at the Workers' Compensation Institute. He's a 30-year veteran of risk management and insurance industry, and is regarded as one of the brightest minds in the industry. Since 2004, David has saved his clients well over $50 million in premiums and overcharges. He's written articles for many of the industry's top magazines. He's performed programs across the United States for associations and business groups, including our own PSBA. I want to welcome everybody. I'm going to introduce David. I'm going to put myself on mute. You're going to be hearing David. If you have any questions at all during this session, please feel free to use the question function, and David will stop in between and we'll take questions from the group. So without further hesitation, I'm happy to introduce and to welcome David Leng. David, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Welcome, everybody. I've actually done this presentation for several associations around the country, and it's rather interesting in regards of how everything is evolving with regards to opioids and medical marijuana and impacting. The downside of doing this via webinar, Mike, though, is I don't have any free samples to hand out to everybody, and nobody's here to get them. So anyhow, the issue with this is they are impacting workers' compensation. And it has become a significant issue with regards to how much is being spent in the insurance world, the workers' compensation world, but more importantly, it is impacting the lives of the employees. Give you a little quick background. But I have a degree in risk management from Penn State. 4 months out of college, I was doing work as a consultant. I showed up for our first meeting with a prospective business, and when you pull into a large manufacturing plant, they're normally very, very loud and noisy. All you heard when I opened up my door was the squawking of the EMS and police radios. An employee had unfortunately been killed. Over the years since I started working with them, I have seen firsthand the impact such an injury can have. This employee happened to be the best friend of the owner of the company, and I saw how little workers' compensation did for the family. I mean, yes, they got money, but they were never quite the same. So my mantra has become to get everybody to go home the same way they showed up. And that's really the gist behind this. And over the years, as we've identified and looked at what's happening and how employees get injured and the problems that they're facing when they are injured, we've changed and adapted programs for our clients to not just reduce insurance premiums, but more importantly, keep the employees safe and everybody. So when it comes to drugs and workers' compensation, basically everybody is affected. Years ago, one of our clients that we were working with, myself and Mike Lukart, who's the head of the risk management division for Keystone Insurance Group, we were struggling with why 2 employees for this building supply dealer were off significantly long when pretty much everybody else we could think of would have been back to work. So we reached out to the insurance company and asked them for the check registry, and we were looking to see where the checks were actually being paid. And we noticed how many checks and large dollars were going to the pharmacy. So we asked the insurance company to look in, and for every injury, there's a diagnosis code, and that's how the insurance industry pays things. And then there's codes for things that get how they pay them in terms of individual things like physical therapy or pharmacy or whatever. Anyhow, long story short, they were both receiving for a long period of time opioids. We thought that was really odd that we had 2 at one doctor's that were on significant opioids for an extended period of time. So when we asked the insurance company, it was a pretty large insurance company in Pennsylvania, to run a report using this doctor as a pay code, this office, it turns out that their prescriptions for opioids were running 3 to 4 times the ratio of everybody else. A couple years later, we found out the guy was arrested for selling prescriptions. But the point is, they become addictive, and that's what we're talking about. Now, I will put this disclaimer in. I am not an attorney, however, and I did not stay at a Holiday Inn Express last night. But I work closely with a lot of attorneys, including the 2 attorneys that work for Keystone's Risk Management Division. They're both labor and HR attorneys. So ultimately, though, when you're dealing with these issues and you have to address things, you do need to seek appropriate legal counsel. But ultimately, drugs affect everybody in an organization. When you start seeing the costs that are going out, you see it with what's going on in the health insurance world. You see it with employees that are out for a prolonged period of time. And a lot of people are going, how do we address this? How do we keep our employees safe? How do we deal with this? So when we talk about opioids and marijuana, we're going to start with opioids. In 2017, there were a significant number of overdose deaths. It's well above industry average when you look at, or I should say national average. So Pennsylvania was running a fever, so to speak. But the problem is not understanding why we're here or where we're at. It's understanding how did we get here. The biggest culprit, for lack of a better term, was the medical industry itself, unknowingly, I guess you could say. They determined that chronic pain was left untreated. So a lot of organizations said, hey, we need to focus on patient comfort, make them comfortable and so forth. So doctors were prescribing pain pills. And they were citing these kind of statistics where, the chances of getting addicted is really, really, really small. Fast forward to today, we now know that whatever studies these were based on, turned out not to be true, which also concerns us when it comes to the marijuana side of things. So, but the drugs are used because of the effect on the brain and the ability to numb the pain. But that affecting of the brain eventually causes other issues. Now, there are some that have no abuse potential, but unfortunately for opioids, they do have significant. Now, these are the kinds of the drugs that you may have seen or understand, and the common names for the opioids that are being prescribed to your employees. So when you start digging in and understanding what an employee is, receiving, and we'll talk about that a little bit more, how and why you should know what they're receiving. It's important when you start seeing these names that you understand how to treat and deal with your employees. So, interesting enough, the studies are showing that most people that become addicted to opioids happen to be or be prescribed opioids, I should say, are of working class. And face it, most people are in the working class category in terms of just the general population, but people tend to not only be active at work, but as well as active out of work. Back injuries are a frequent cause of injuries, for example. And a lot of doctors, because of the pain related to it, both short and long term, were addressing it with opioids. Now, that may or may not be necessary, but it happens to deal with doctors ask you, what is your pain level? It might be from 0 to 10, and you might say, hey, it's an 8 to me. Well, it has to do more with what is your individual pain threshold. And to give you an idea, I still, to this day, freak out my dentist because I don't need Novocaine when I have a filling done. Doesn't bother me. But there are people that don't like that and actually go and get sedated when they go get their teeth taken care of. So unfortunately, doctors were trying to make the patients comfortable, but not really understanding that it might not necessarily be needed. And the bigger problem is they're using opioids over a long period of time. So anyone who takes opioids has an potential for addiction. But it all is going to depend on your own physiology and length of time that you're using it. And ultimately, it can take as little as 1 week to become addicted, which is concerning. So opioids, just so you understand, were developed to actually treat end-stage cancer patients who were in significant amounts of pain. And over time, since they thought that they were safe to use because there wasn't very much data relating to addiction, they began to use them. So according to ACOM, American College of Occupational and Environmental Medicine, that is the leading organization with regards to employee injuries. They are saying that 42% of back injuries received an opioid in the first year after their injury. But what's scary is most of them were prescribed at the very first visit. And 1 year later, 16% of those were still receiving opioids. So something that was medically designed for short-term use has a high ratio of being prescribed over a long period of time. And clearly, this is where you start seeing people that become addicted to opioids. So the idea is, if somebody is going to receive one, you want it to be only for a few days so that they have a reduced likelihood when they're being addicted, but we can manage the pain, so to speak, for that injured employee for a period of time till things start healing. They also want to make sure that the doctor is giving them the lowest dose possible. And they take it as prescribed. That's the other problem. They feel like, oh, I got more pain, so they take, there's many people that have taken 2 doses in a very short time frame, which leads to additional problems. So here's what to do as an employer. Many of you may have a panel of physicians. That's the employer's panel of physicians. You as the employer have the right to choose doctors that your employees must go to over the first 90 days. Now, so that you have an enforceable panel come, if you ever have to appear in court, you have to have the employee sign off at the time of hire, at any time that you change that panel, and at the time of injury, or shortly thereafter. There is also a separate right to know form that also needs to be signed at the exact same times. So if you want to have an enforceable panel, you need to make sure you get employee signatures. Number 2, where are you getting your panel from? Most panels come from the insurance companies. Insurance companies, the question is always how they pick their doctors. They're picking doctors that they can reduce their per visit charges to help reduce the cost of medical, which does help to reduce the cost of workers' comp and ultimately the impact on your experience modifier and your future premium. So that's a good thing. However, over the years, since doctors make more on workers' compensation than they do health insurance, there's a lot of doctors that have migrated to saying they'll treat employee injuries, but may not fully understand how to deal with them. They may not follow ACOM standards. ACOM not only says for every diagnosis, there's a diagnosis code that we referenced before, they actually have a best practices. So instead of prescribing somebody, let's say they sprain their back, if they say they need a pain reduction and anti-inflammatory, rather than prescribing an opioid and an anti-inflammatory, guess what? Ibuprofen does both. So there might be other things that they could prescribe depending upon how the patient's pain tolerance, so to speak, is. Now, what's also interesting is that over the last several years, from a medical standpoint, 20 years ago, 60% of in workers' compensation spend was on wages. 40% was for medical bills. Today, it's reversed. 40% is on wages and 60% on medical bills. And that's not because employers are doing a better job of reducing lost time injuries or getting people back to work. It's think about what's going on with your health insurance costs. Medical inflation has accelerated dramatically. So what you actually need to do is screen your doctor. Yes, you can actually choose doctors on your panel. If you don't know the doctor and the doctor doesn't know you, how are they going to handle your employees? How are they going to know what they can do maybe on transitional duty? And how do you know if the doctor follows best practices or if they're just going to listen to the employee or not? You can ask them, what is their policy on prescribing opioids? That's one of the questions that we typically ask when setting up panels for clients. We want to make sure that doctors are going to be effective for your employees. Getting them the right care as quickly as possible, it has a better outcome than trying to save a couple bucks on every visit. But ultimately, you need to educate employees on the dangers of opioids, how they work, the potential for addiction, and make sure that they understand if they receive a prescription for opioids, they should let you know so you can keep an eye on them. And you can also work with your adjuster. Just so you understand, workers' compensation injuries are not HIPAA. In other words, you as the employer have the right to know what's going on with your employee, what the diagnosis is, how they're being treated, and how it's affecting them from a job standpoint. You have the right to know this. You don't have the right to know if they have some other personal medical condition, even if it delays recovery. So in this case, you want to talk to the adjuster and say, hey, adjuster, let us know if an opioid's been prescribed for more than a week and if it's renewed and so forth. And then ultimately, if they are given one, particularly more than, let's say, a week, if they have it for a week, and it doesn't get renewed, wouldn't be too concerned about it. But if they happen to get a refill, you want to make sure that you have a plan to understand how are they going to get off of those. Number two, when they are taking opioids, you want to make sure that the employee has a social network. That could be family, friends, coworkers, people that are going to keep an eye on them to make sure that they're not succumbing to an opioid addiction. Plus, the more important thing to do is actually get them back to work. All the medical evidence shows that they heal better and faster on the job than off the job due to the psychological aspects of being at work. Face it, you're at your work more than you are with your family. Not to mention, if they're sitting at home, they're seeing, every attorney, probably 2 or 3 of them every commercial break. So it's more important to understand what's going on with your employees than ever, particularly when it comes to dealing with opioids. But ultimately, bringing them back to work, not only does it reduce the time frame of the injury, it reduces the cost of the injury, and of course, then your future premiums. So if you want to save money on your workers' compensation, you need to reduce the claims and bring employees back to work. Now, even with all the new law changes and everything relating, post-accident drug testing is still allowed and can be a basis for denial of work comp benefits. But the problem is you have to be able to show the employee was under the influence at the time and that the influence had an effect on causing the injury. That's important to know, because when it comes to testing employees, if, let's say, they don't tell you they get injured and then 2 days later they come to you and say, hey, I tweaked my back 2 days ago, and now I got to go, I'm going to see a doctor, that's a little too late to find out whether they had a problem. So you always want to make sure that employees know that they have to notify you anytime that there's an incident. But more importantly, you have to be able to train your managers to identify employees that might be under the influence, because when it comes to denying the claim, your observations, what were they doing, how were they talking, even odor that they may be putting, is important to determine can the claim be denied because they were under the influence. Now, on a side note, I've seen some employers have the mistake of testing only an injured person when multiple people involved. We had a scenario where I met a school bus contractor that had a driver and an aide. The driver caused the accident of the van, and they tested the aide, and the aide failed the drug test. The insurance company decided to deny the claim. When it went to court, the courts awarded benefits because the employee did not have any part of the cause of the injury. But more importantly, since they were a van driver, they didn't have a policy of testing their van drivers at the time for the accident. So then later the employee sued not only for the workers' comp, but also for discrimination because they didn't test the driver, and actually won in court. So ultimately, you want to create a culture that stresses safety on the job to prevent injuries, because if you don't have the injuries, you don't have somebody that is at risk to get addicted to opioids. So you want to make sure that the employees are trained to do their job, have the appropriate equipment and training to do it. If you have to have some significant work done at your facilities or wherever, maybe instead of having your own employees do it, subcontract it out. Maybe it's, subcontracting out, a heavy transmission replacement or something like that if you don't have all the appropriate equipment, because ultimately reducing injuries reduces your premium. The signals that you want to look for, the key signs, is the employee put off of work longer than you would expect. They prescribe longer than a week, and that the treatment seems to be a lot more than what you would expect given the injury. If the person's off longer than you expect and you sit there and say, hey, wait a minute, I should be back to work if it was me, or this guy seems to be going to a lot of physical therapy and it just doesn't add up, that's where you want to have conversations. And then ultimately, when you're reviewing and discussing the file with your adjuster, if subsequent evaluations of the employee are different than what happened initially, or then that's another reason why you want to call it, go through things. So that's opioids. We're going to shift now to the more interesting topic of medical marijuana in Pennsylvania, or marijuana in general, and the effect it's having on workers' comp. Now, when face-to-face, I always like to see how many hands go up for this, but just I would say very small percentage think marijuana should be legal in general. I just find it interesting. But when I ask the question if an employer should be able to restrict or prohibit employees from being under the influence of medical marijuana, every hand goes up. Now, the reason why you're hearing all this stuff about marijuana as opposed to opioids is the proposed, how safe they are. So the question is, how many injuries have there been associated with medical use of marijuana? Actually, none. That's what's the reason why it's being viewed as safe, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. However, how many deaths have occurred with the use of selfies between 2011 and 2017? It's actually 259. Now, I don't know how many selfies involve medical marijuana, especially because I once saw a photo of a guy who climbed a cell phone tower to get a selfie. You got to wonder if people are just, maybe they're under the influence and that leads them to do that. But nobody has actually had an overdose. There are 42 states that have actually enacted laws relating to medical marijuana. And it may be that they've made medical available, like Pennsylvania has. They may have fully made it legal, like several states in the dark have. They may have provided medical and decriminalized the use of recreational marijuana, or just decriminalize it altogether. And that's kind of the makeup that you'll see on the map. But to understand, marijuana is the most commonly used drug in the country. Now, 94 million people have actually admitted that they used it once. So I guess I'll use the phrase, I tried it, but I didn't inhale. But it's kind of interesting that in 2005, the last statistic I could find, 242,000 emergency room visits involving marijuana. Marijuana is sometimes viewed as the gateway drug, and this is the statistics that go with it. people that start using it as a younger age tend to go on to heavier matters to continue to get the same. And just understand, marijuana is second to alcohol when it comes to fatal auto accidents. Okay, Colorado, the first state to make it legal. Denver Post stated that one of the results of this was increased rates of graduation. I'm not quite sure if that was a cause and effect, but they did cite it. There's an increase in homelessness. Fatal accidents has risen with use of marijuana by 145%. Now, here's where it hits your pocketbook. There's been an increase of almost 55% in auto insurance rates during this time frame. And keep in mind, our auto insurance rates are already going up because of distracted drivers and the use of cell phones. Increase in poison control, emergency room visits. But my favorite, regulators indicted for corruption relating to the marijuana. So Pennsylvania has created a situation where an individual who has a serious medical condition, we'll go through that, can go to a physician that will certify the condition and provide them with a medical certification, not a prescription, but a card. They then get their card, and they're able to purchase marijuana at a dispensary. Now, I don't know another drug that is given by a doctor that you see once, that you can order as much as you want and consume as needed, and then not to see a doctor for a whole year to keep receiving your quote-unquote medication. I'm just not aware of any. So this is kind of concerning because ultimately, since marijuana is federally illegal, as we'll talk about, there have been very few studies on the long-term effects of the use of marijuana because you just can't use it in the country. So the same issue that we saw with the opioids, where there was wrong information given out relating to addictiveness and so forth, we don't know what's going to happen down the road. But ultimately, these are the serious medical conditions, and the one that is concerning is it says severe, chronic, or intractable pain. We talked about it before. What is somebody's pain level? How much do they feel? And what is their pain threshold? So, over time, we will see, has this been abused or not? But just understand, I am not in this whole process either condoning or saying no to marijuana. There has been some current studies that say some of the benefits of it. In fact, there's a number of studies now that are coming out showing that THC has helped students with ADD or autism be more focused at school. The problem is it wears off during the day, and parents are asking now to come back into schools to re-administer. But just also imagine if you have a student that has this that may be under the influence when they get onto your bus. Now, in Pennsylvania, you can only consume it or put it on your body. There is no smoking of it, although I'm starting to hear that they might try to do that. But we shall see. But this is the reason why employers are concerned. I speak all over the country and trained agents, and several have sent me videos from surveillance cameras of incidents involving people that have been supposedly, it is not letting me play. Okay, moving on. My QuickTime is not working. But this was actually taken by a manager, and you can actually see where the hose isn't connected. The manager eventually, who was trained in reasonable suspicion, asked several questions and dealt with it and actually sent the employee to get drug tested, and the employee failed. Just to understand, this forklift on the left eventually backs in and takes out this shelf on the left, causing significant damage and all the inventory coming down. So marijuana can affect all kinds of things, from sleep to mood to memory, as well as pain. And there are several parts to a cannabis plant that we have to discuss. There are parts of it that provide pain relief or seizure relief, relaxes muscles, but there are also some undesirable effects as well. The problem with the THC is it does alter your senses, and it can create issues, particularly if they're under the influence at work. But ultimately, if they take it for a prolonged period of time, or if they take high doses, you start getting hallucinations, psychosis, and things like that, or delusions. That certainly can create issues at work. And that's why in the Pennsylvania law, you as the employer can prohibit somebody from using marijuana while at work. Now, some of the issues that seem to be that employers have reported, under the influence due to the fact that, I should say, you can consume marijuana. Actually, let me back up. The issue we're seeing is that there are employees showing up to work that are under the influence. So they may have, because THC takes an extended period of time to come out of your body. In fact, as everybody might know, it can be in your system for up to 30 days after consumption for a drug test. But since you take it orally takes time to get into your body and get through the digestion process. So there's cases where somebody takes it, doesn't feel the effect, takes more, and then by then they've taken too much. And depending upon the person, it could be over 24 hours that they're feeling the effects. So they could be showing up on Monday morning to drive your vehicles and be under the influence. Don't believe that. We have a client here outside of Pittsburgh that has breathalyzers at each and every one of their locations. Every Monday morning after a Pittsburgh Steelers game or after any major sport event, guess what? You as a driver, whether it be CDL or a van, have to blow into a tube. He's had people show up the very next morning blowing a .06. Think about that. So we mentioned it is still illegal federally. It's just the state has basically said it's okay for medical. Now, these are the questions that we get from employers that we'll address here today, especially as it applies to our school bus friends. Now, here's the problem. Pennsylvania put in a provision in the law that says you as an employer cannot discriminate against somebody that has a medical marijuana card. So if you're hiring somebody and they say, hey, I have a medical marijuana card, you cannot discriminate relating to their employment. However, we'll talk about the CDLs in a moment. You have the ability to still make sure that they're not under the influence while at work. The issue becomes you need to be able to show that their performance has fallen below standards. So if you don't have written job descriptions and job requirements and do performance appraisals, you can't show that their standard of performance has dropped. Therefore, you can't let them go if they have a medical marijuana card. There is safety-sensitive positions where you as an employer do not have to hire somebody that has a medical marijuana card. But the problem is it is not clear, and I'll explain, show you in a moment. once again, you do not need to allow somebody to take marijuana on your property. So here are the safety-sensitive positions: high voltage, confined spaces, performing tasks that threaten the life of employees or coworkers, when they're a danger to themselves or others, or public or health safety risk. Now, federally, the Department of Transportation views driving a commercial vehicle as a safety-sensitive position. They're taking this task, as everybody knows, that you cannot be under medical marijuana for CDL. But as of now, there is no court cases relating to the van drivers. And you would sit and say, well, they're a safety-sensitive position. I agree with you. You know, talking to the HR attorneys, it makes sense that they are a safety-sensitive position. But I will tell you this: the very first court case in Pennsylvania that got settled or was rolled on a couple weeks ago was a home health care nurse that would go from place to place, home to home, and even take a patient to a doctor's appointment, administer a medication, and they had a medical marijuana card, and they failed their random drug test. The employer terminated them, saying it was a safety-sensitive position. The Pennsylvania court says it was not a safety-sensitive position. So that's kind of concerning in that regards. So nobody is allowed to have, from the Department of Transportation view, the use of medical marijuana. And that pretty much takes any of your large vehicles as well as your larger passenger vehicles. Now, they're not allowed to have any THC in their system. So when you do your pre-hire and your random tests or post-accidents, if they have THC, you are allowed to, because federal law applies and supersedes state. Now, the issue and the question we seem to get is all relating to CBD. It used to be prohibited, but now the last report, which actually came out on Tuesday the 18th, says that you should exercise extreme caution. The reason being is 100% THC-free CBD is not 100% free. It can contain up to 0.3%, which will leave trace amounts of THC in the system, and no THC is allowed to be in the system. The other problem is the DOT has cited that there are higher strains out there that can also, they're finding it in labs, they contain much higher because of poor quality and controls of the manufacturers. All of this can cause your drivers to fail a drug test. So CBD is still prohibited. This is what they actually put out with regards to the notice. If anybody wants a copy of it, I have it. I know the School Bus Association has it. It's a pretty good, pretty quick 2-page read on what's going on from the Federal Department of Transportation. So if you notice at the bottom, it says, the use of CBD is not a legitimate medical explanation for a failed marijuana test. So once again, your commercial drivers are not allowed to have it. So the question comes back to the van drivers. They're not specifically addressed under the CDL rules, and they're not specifically described or defined as a safety-sensitive position. You know, we're looking at could they be a danger to themselves or other is really the applicable section of the law that says, and everybody seems to agree that they're safety sensitive, but there is no court case yet to actually put this in place. I've been working with the association as well as several legislators to deal with this, and hopefully they'll pass something to actually stipulate it as a safety sensitive position. But there's a lot of others. Just imagine, though, one of your van drivers causes a serious accident and either doesn't meet the physical standards to drive a commercial vehicle or fails a drug test. Do you really want to see the potential lawsuit set against you if this occurred? Probably not. We're seeing nuclear verdicts in the transportation world right now. We saw one for a appliance delivery that just recently was had to pay out $14 million because basically the driver followed too closely the vehicle in front of him, and when the vehicle in front of him moved over to the side, he didn't have time to avoid a vehicle on the side of the road and actually pushed the car into and top of the driver of the vehicle that was disabled on the side of the road. So ultimately, you really should be making sure you drug test your van drivers and they meet your physical standards, because of what we're seeing in terms of these judgments. It's quite possible if you don't do this, you will exceed your policy limits when it comes time to a jury awarding a verdict. Now, they do put in there some things about 10 nanograms per milliliter and all this kind of stuff. The point is if it's in your system, it's in your system. The problem is everybody's body type and chemistry is different, so whether or not they're under the influence or not, it's tough to tell. But ultimately, you need to be able to show how their performance fell below standards. So your drivers, you might be okay, but now your office personnel, or let's say you have a mechanic that maybe just works in the shop but doesn't need to drive, these are positions that would probably be allowed to have medical marijuana cards. Now, interesting on a note, Pennsylvania's law actually makes it a misdemeanor if you have any amount of Schedule I substance in your driver's blood. So let's say you get pulled over and you're tired. You weren't under the influence of alcohol or whatever, but then the police officer says, well, I can't tell if you're not under the influence of alcohol, so I'm going to send you for a blood test. And you have a trace amount of any amount of trace amount, even from CBD, in your blood when you get pulled over, even though you were just tired, you will get charged with a DUI in Pennsylvania. Just something to be aware of. Now, post-accident drug testing is still allowed. Failure can be the basis of denial, but like we talked about, you need to be able to show there's cause and effect. The other problem is the THC level, testing is very expensive, needs blood. You have to be able to show that they were actually under the influence. So really what it comes down to, you need to be able to have your managers trained for reasonable suspicion and detailed accident investigation, a robust accident investigation program. We have found at the Risk Management Division Keystone, there is no better tool that an employer can have than a good accident investigation program. Basically, getting the employee statement, witnesses, what happens, where it happened, what the root cause is. And just understand, a first report of injury is not an accident investigation. The form you fill out for the workers' comp is not enough. And once again, make sure your managers are trained for reasonable suspicion, because you need to be able to convey that this is why we feel that they were under the influence at the time. And before employees go even out the door, having managers have conversations with employees to see if maybe somebody's under the influence from something the previous night may help prevent an accident, and you can send them off for testing. Ultimately, as an employer, you should go through the process of identifying the risks in your organization, not just from a safety or employee injury standpoint, but also with things like the drugs that may affect you. And then you analyze them, figure out how to best to control them, and put programs in place to address them. This is what we do time and time again with our clients. You may want to do employee interviews, walk-arounds, Turn your safety committee into a safety and well-being committee to address things like addiction and so forth. And also even, risk management checklists. If you need assistance, the risk management division of Keystone is at your disposal to ask questions. But ultimately, you want to analyze your data and look and seeing what is going on with your operation to see if, where and how you're having issues. Are you having higher rates of drug tests and things like failures? Are you having higher rates of absenteeism? These are the things that will tell you there's something going on that you may need to address. So ultimately, you as an employer need to make sure that your handbooks and policies and procedures are up to date, your job descriptions, making sure you have the right questions for when you're going to hire people, and ultimately, evaluate where you're at with all your drug testing policies and your safety policies for so forth. Okay. But ultimately, the biggest things is make sure your managers are trained for reasonable suspicion, because it's better to try to find somebody that it may be under the influence before they actually injure themselves or others. Take a look and watch your drivers before they go out the door each day. You want to make sure that there's not going to be a problem. But ultimately, as I mentioned before, there is no court case yet relating to the van drivers being specifically labeled as a safety-sensitive position. So unfortunately, somebody's going to be the first guinea pig. So make sure you have an employment-related practices liability insurance policy that's what covers you and pays for defense for wrongful termination, harassment, discrimination, all those things, because they're going to come back and say, you discriminate against me because I have a medical marijuana card. They're going to go to state court, not federal. So with that, we're going to jump to workers' compensation issues that are going on. Remember, if you're 20 or more employees, your OSHA 300A summary is due electronically to OSHA by March 2nd. So you want to make sure you get that uploaded. If you need help, just reach out to myself or the Risk Management Division at Keystone. Something you may not be aware of, several years ago, I started working with and challenging the Pennsylvania Compensation Rating Bureau with regards to the experience modifier, because what we were seeing is I was able to show them that the average experience modifier was actually over 1 in the state, well over 1. We've been having arguments even since it was developed that the capping system, the 42,500, which has been static since 2004, is unfortunately being told by many agents, oh, it's over 40, your claim is over 42.5, you don't need to worry about it. It's actually costing employers more money than they realize. It's punitive, and it doesn't do exactly what they want. So they are analyzing it. We've looked at different models. It's kind of interesting. The new formulas that they're showing will be more responsive. Frequency of claims will carry more weight. There is also going to be a cost you more if you're not bringing the employees back to work. In fact, one of the models showed that if you have a lost time claim where they've paid a wage to an employee, the impact on your experience modifier might be 2 times or more what the medical only is. So ultimately, you need to make sure that you are doing the best that you can to reduce the claims costs of the for your employee, because ultimately it's going to cost you more money, moving forward with the new experience modifier. Lastly, being a member of Keystone, I wanted to make sure everybody's aware of when you're in the Keystone program, there are a lot of services that are available to you at no additional cost through the Risk Management Division of Keystone and the HR Division of Keystone. From customized claim service. I don't know if you where that the risk management division of Keystone has, I believe, give or take a couple people head count, close to 26 degreed safety professionals. I think somewhere around 14, 15 seasoned claims professionals, 9 degreed HR professionals, including 2 HR and labor attorneys. They've added 3 DOT and fleet safety specialists over the past probably 3-4 years to support those that take advantage of the School Bus Association's insurance program. So there are resources for you that can help you go through all of this. If you need help, there's also, with handbooks, you got Grace Kelly out there. I mean, there's a lot of resources for you. And ultimately, that is it.
Wow.
A lot of information.
That is a lot. That is a lot. That is a ton.
Sorry. And
so I only have, if you have any questions, if you have any questions, I have one that I received. Please feel free to send them our way, post them. But here's what I have for you, David. Is the reporting time that you just mentioned for 20 full-time employees or a total of 20 employees, full and part-time?
Head count. Doesn't matter, full-time or part-time. It's just head count.
Gotcha. All right.
Yeah.
I did get a question. Yes, this webinar is being recorded, so if you hopped on here late, you can catch the full act. We'll usually send an email out to everybody letting them know when it's ready. Are there any other questions for David? The handout that you have, the presentation, we'll be sending out to everybody who was on the webinar in a follow-up email. David will forward that to us.
Mm-hmm.
David, you want to talk about what you got up on the screen here?
Oh, no, this is just my contact information if they need anything, because I know what happens.
Okay.
You go to a webinar, you go to a seminar, you sit there and go, wow, that's a lot of information. You're scribbling, taking a bunch of notes. And then you get back to the real world, and you go, 48 from now, you may not even remember my name or what I said. A week from now, you probably forget you were even on the webinar. But if you make sure, if you need assistance, you have issues, here's my contact information. I can at least direct you to the right place to get the information if it's something we don't have handy. I can put you in touch with the risk management division of Keystone or wherever you need to do it, because you don't need to do this alone. There's a lot of stuff relating to the not just the drug world, but in HR world, but DOT. I mean, there's a lot of moving parts right now, and it seems to be accelerating rather than getting calmer for our school bus contractors.
Gotcha. All right. Seeing that there are no other questions, and again, you have David's contact information, let me just remind everybody our next webinar is in April 16th, and that will be with Darren Rayomi from Q-Straint. The topic is going to deal with wheelchair securement standards. So we're excited to have Darren also back to do a webinar for us. David, again, I want to thank Keystone for helping us make this connection. And we appreciate your support of our webinar series, David. Thank you.
Oh, absolutely. Anytime you need me, just let me know.
Excellent. Everybody, have a great day. Be safe, and we'll be in touch soon. Thanks again for joining us. Bye-bye.